This is part 2 of our interview with Iain de Jong of OrgCode. In part 1, we talked about how people who work in homeless response are not powerless, despite the challenges you may be facing. In the second half of our interview, we'll talk through some examples of specific roles and how to manage feelings of powerlessness in those roles. Can we get a little more concrete about that? Like, let's say that I am front desk staff at a shelter, right? And I have been given a set of procedures. I need to follow certain procedures to check people in. I need to kind of try to maintain order. And my training has been about procedures. And I'm like, well, I guess that's what I do. Is that the limit of my agency? Or can I make decisions that affect lives?
You absolutely can make decisions that affect lives, even with following the procedures. So I'm not saying don't follow the procedures. Let's be clear on that. But what can I do? I can take that extra moment and look someone in the eye and help them feel seen and know that I'm going to have a connection back from them at the same moment, which fills my vessel. I can absolutely control that. I can control the feedback that I provide my supervisor, my boss, whatever, on those procedures, how we dehumanize the connection. And so really kind of embracing the fact that if this is what I'm doing for the living, I better be the best at those procedures that anybody's ever seen, right? I will procedure those procedures with humanity and grace and humility. I will understand that the only way those procedures will ever get better is by people like me who do them every single day, providing insight into how we can make them better and embracing that my role isn't just doing the procedures. My role is creating an experience related to those procedures. And I can absolutely control, well, maybe not control, but I can certainly influence other people's experience of those procedures. In other words, my job could come across as administrative and almost cold, or my job can come across as engaging and warm, of which procedures are something that I do in addition to connection. And so just coming back to connection, so I'll say that's concrete. One more thing I'll put out there in terms of concrete action, if I was like a shelter worker procedures, taking time at the end of every single day to honestly ask myself, what was the best part about today and what's something that I learned for tomorrow? And that might sound hokey as crap, but I had a mentor many years ago. I mean, now I have a phone for, in those days, it was like a little notebook that I kept in my pocket. And I'll say for the first 3 months I did it, I thought it was the dumbest thing I was doing, but I was sticking with it because the mentor told me to do it. And then fast forward like 6 or 7 months later and having a really crappy day and just feeling like I'm not making a difference and flipping through that book and realize, you know what? I've actually had lots of interesting, good things that have happened, and I've actually learned a ton in the work. And what I've learned isn't just about the people who are homeless, it isn't just about the systems. I've learned a lot about myself. And that is back to the reward part. Our opportunity for growth isn't just technical, it is sometimes personal, it's relational.
You mentioned that one of the things that I, as a front desk staff member at a shelter, would have control over is somebody else's experience of the procedure that we've got to walk through them with, whether it feels cold and administrative or warm and empathetic. What are the consequences of whether the person who comes to the shelter has that more administrative experience or the more warm experience?
It is the difference between if I was a person who was using the services, is this transactional or is this transformational? And I think that's a deliberate choice on our part to try to create transformational experiences. So let's try to look at it from the perspective of someone who uses the services. Often bounced around from program to program, service to service, shelter to shelter. We as a sector are not very good at telling people when there's nothing that we can do. So we create these goose chases for people like, I can't do it, but go over there and they'll do it for you. So when people do finally connect with a program like a shelter that they can stay at, there's going to be some trust issues right at the very beginning, right? Are you going to actually do anything that's different for me? And so when we cultivate an experience that is intentionally going to be focused on a relationship, seeing the person, hearing the person, being patient with however they're presenting because of their trauma, behaviors, substance use, bad days, good days, whatever, but just being in a place of being. And I often say that in the space of difference making, we find overlap between two realms. So the first is, am I proximate? And that doesn't mean like I have to be in your face, but do I have to actually see that there's connection here? And the connection is geographic. So if I'm going through administrative procedures and I'm just staring down at my computer or my notebook and filling out a form, there's no connection. I'm not proximate to you. I'm not there. And the second part, which is related in the overlap, is, am I present? When I'm having that conversation with someone who's going through our procedures, am I thinking about, like, do I need to get milk on the way home? Am I thinking about, my goodness, my kid drove me bonkers before I came to work today? Am I thinking about, you know what, I got that class that I need to take or the training I need to take and it just seems to be the wrong time? Or am I like, this person, this moment, this story is the most important thing that's happening? And that takes a huge amount of discipline, but I'll tell you, the reward for the work is much greater when you can figure out how to marry proximity with presence, find that overlap in the space where you actually have real human connection, and realize, to a funder or to your employer, you might just be doing the task that is assigned to the job description. But for that individual couple or family that's experiencing that, you are the face of hope. You are the face of opportunity. And you're, if neither of those things, hopefully the face of safety, emotional safety, physical safety, psychosocial safety, cultural safety, all the different dimensions of safety that we can put into this space. And there's something about connecting with people in a way that's meaningful that allows them to say, you know what? I can start to think through next steps. I can start to engage with staff or programs in a different way. I can, enter into some conversation about next week, next month, next, few months from now, as opposed to just being stuck in the moment of survival. And that connection is so critically important to help people be seen and felt as human.
What you said about building trust, we know that a lot of what is sometimes referred to as service resistance is really people questioning whether or not they can trust the system. It sounds like what you're saying is that direct service staff have a big role to play in building the trust that gets people on the road to eventual housing.
Absolutely. And, I always say to direct service staff when I have the opportunity to train or mentor, um, you might have a job title like shelter intake worker or shelter staff or case manager or those sorts of things. But aside from that, which is important for HR reasons and those sorts of things, I actually think your job title comes down to one of two, and you can pick both if you want. Number one, are you a change agent, right? And change starts with meeting people where they're at, but not leaving them where they were. In other words, the entire purpose of connecting with you is to help you see promise of tomorrow in a way that's different than today. So that's number one. The second one is, you are a peddler of hope. And I don't mean that in a like dream sort of sense. Like, I hope that the Toronto Maple Leafs will win the Stanley Cup. That's probably never going to happen in my lifetime. I can hope for it. That's not the hope I'm talking about. I'm talking about hope that we can actually enter into an engagement that leads you to believe that the resources we have to offer add value to your life. That, as convoluted as some of our processes may be, that they're worth enduring if the outcome is going to be beneficial to you. That for that person who may be deeply in survival mode, and has been for a period of time, that we can create and manufacture a condition of safety that might let you let your guard down a little bit, to the point where you're still surviving, but you're also being able to start thinking a little bit more beyond the initial kind of, is this safe for me? And once you realize it is safe for me, processing, do I trust the service provider? Do I feel empowered by the service provider? Do I feel a connection with the programs that are being offered, or I feel that they're being thrust upon me? Do I feel that I still have agency, and that people aren't trying to take away who I am in this process, but actually instead, elevate who I am for this experience? Those are all things that direct service staff can influence. And once we accept that responsibility, I'm also going to say, as hokey as it sounds, because I'm full of the hokiness today, that's where you find the joy in the work again. The joy isn't the tectonic shifts, right? Like, of course, we'd be like enthused if suddenly thousands of units of housing that's affordable fell from the sky and supportive housing fell from the sky, and it's not going to happen. So the only reason why you're going to stay and find joy in the work is either you're a masochist, which I would hope is not the case, or you are trying to influence the conditions to find hope with people in an environment that is trying to take away hope. And that's why it's an intentional process. That's why how we show up matters. It's why listening to where people are at leads to better relationships to talk about what's next. It's also why, we don't just lead with, here's all of our programs and the menu of options for you, but deepening our understanding of who are you as an individual, couple, or family. Um, People speak the language of needs before they speak the language of goals, right? So us trying to get further ahead of people, like really understanding, you know, uh, if 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 your immediate need is hunger, then let's deal with that and then talk about what's next. If your immediate need is you want a safe place to sleep tonight, let's deal with that and then do the other things. But I can do that in such a way that people feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel that we truly care about their well-being.
Can we talk about a couple more specific examples? One of the other sources of frustration for case managers, especially or housing navigators, housing locators, is the fact that they may have some funds to help people get settled in a new place. They may have the local furniture bank and all the good stuff, but they don't have housing because everywhere is struggling with not having enough affordable housing. What would you say to somebody who's feeling powerless because of that specifically?
So we have a choice in that space, right? Which is, and this is going to sound a little harsh to start, but I'm gonna back it up and be kind in a moment. If I think there's no housing and I'm a housing navigator, my choice is either I'm just going to manage the decline, right? Things are just going to get worse and I'll try to reduce as much harm in the process, or I'm going to accept the challenge to innovate. When you manage the decline, it's still a rational choice, but managing the decline means we're also not telling people about housing options because we've essentially given up on housing options, or we don't work people through our processes, coordinated entry or whatever else, because we just think there's nothing at the other end. Okay, innovation. Let's just use some crude former point in time numbers, and then I'm going to make a relationship to some other stats. So let's say at least it's always an undercount, at least 800,000 people are homeless on any given night in the United States of America. About a quarter of those are going to be children. And guess what? Tonight in America, there'll be 40 million people living in economic poverty. Almost all of them are housed. And one of the things that I say to communities that say that there's no housing is, when was the last time you went to low-income neighborhoods, went to talk to people who don't experience homelessness and say, you figure out your housing every single day without us. How do you do it? Teach me. Right? We think about lived experience as just people who've experienced homelessness. We have lived experience of people figuring out housing in this market every single day. And I'm not saying it's glamorous, and I'm not saying everything is replicable, but if you actually build those relationships by going to those, lower income grocery stores, going to the bus stop, going to the community center, going by the, uh, natural gathering places, parks, and those sorts of things in those neighborhoods, and you talk to economically poor people, they are moving. They're not all in the same location. The other data, like Social Security data, would prove that people's address on Social Security is not always the same address. And so if we tap into that as one form of innovation, that might be it. Two, I think there's an attitudinal or moral piece that is a bias sometimes in that space, which is we think of what would I do from my perspective relative to a housing need, as opposed to actually park myself and present a broad range of housing options, like everything from roommates, shared housing, room for rent, through to independent living in a one-bedroom apartment or whatever. I think our sector sometimes gets so fixated on the you need a one bedroom and our resources are for one bedrooms and we're going to find the one bedroom and FMR and average rental costs and whatever are just ridiculous. And then workers get into, well, I can get you a house, but you're not going to be able to stay a house. And they've already reached a conclusion that is not actually going to be helpful. But if I say, okay, here's a range of things, why don't we talk through the pros and cons of each one? And have the person that you're supporting start to generate the pros and cons of each one, but also with a dose of reality. And that dose of reality, I think, is sometimes for the worker, but certainly for the person who's experiencing homelessness, is that if you thought that you were going to get like the high level unit on a building that overlooks the beach with a balcony that's really affordable, that might be a future goal, but that's not a now thing. Not in this market, not in this economy, not at this time. So let's figure out how we get from a place of pie in the sky to more realistic understanding. And then, I really believe that one of the key points of working effectively with people is to realize their housing crisis is not mine to solve. Their housing crisis is mine to journey with them to solve. And so if I'm a frontline worker who's a case manager in like housing navigation or trying to find like units for rent, I would feel like my shoulders are never going to be big enough to carry that weight if I feel solely responsible for finding people's housing. But if I enter a relationship with people to say, we're going to work on this together, mutuality and collaboration is one of the key ways that we embrace trauma-informed care, which means that I won't accept that someone drops their housing needs on my lap, I solve it and give it back to them. No, what I accept is you have a housing need and we will work together to deliberate pros and cons, to explore different options, unit viewings, maybe going to some of those lower income neighborhoods together and talking to people, doing a bit of a realistic profile of what is a need, what is a want when it comes to their housing. Maybe having a bit of the what's your 1, 3, 5 year housing plan. So 1 year is I want to get out of the shelter, I want to get off the street, or I want to get out from living in my car. Okay, 3 years from now it's different. So maybe if we start to position it that way, and that the place you move into doesn't have to be your forever home, we can also have very different conversations around housing access and housing needs and housing supports.
If we were to explore one more example, um, outreach professionals do amazing work reaching people who are sleeping outside and building relationships with them and building that trust that's so necessary. But unfortunately, in a lot of places, criminalization measures are on the rise. And so outreach staff are finding that whoever they have been working with has been told to move on and they're somewhere else, and then they have to find them again, and then they have to find them again, and then they have to find them again. Um, and so that could leave an outreach professional feeling somewhat disempowered. What would your response to that person be?
In the space of street outreach, I think more so than ever before, um, trust is being eroded not by us, but by the criminalization factors, or because we've led people to believe that if they maintain a relationship with us as a street outreach worker, things will get on a trajectory in terms of a solution that isn't immediately coming. So I think we need to be doing a bit of a reset in the engagement and relationship through street outreach. The first is let's be transparent around the things that I can help you with and the things that I can't help you with. But let's also realize that it too needs a transformational relationship and trust to get anywhere. My experience nowadays in the criminalization era, or the hyper criminalization era, I guess criminalization has always been around to some degree, is a lot of outreach workers have devolved to the point where it's the I'm going to lead with the sandwich, clothing, harm reduction supplies, whatever, and then I'm just moving on, right? I did my thing, I kept them alive for the day and move on. And I would go back to if you develop a relationship with people and they trust you, even when they get moved on by an abatement officer or a police officer or, whatever, that when they do reconnect, it's almost like, oh, we found each other. Great. Let's pick up the pieces, as opposed to the relationship falling apart and having to start from scratch. And one of the things that I learned in outreach a long time ago is it's a bit like when I was a kid and my mom would take me to the mall and I was a little bit adventurous. She would say, if we get separated from each other, where do we go to meet up? And I've taken that lesson forward in a lot of my street outreach practice over the years, which is if we get separated, where can we find each other again? Um, and I don't use like or rely upon phone because people lose minutes and lose their phones and that sort of stuff. But it's usually things like a drop-in center or a day service, a hygiene facility, a meal program. Sometimes it's a place of worship. Okay, we'll meet you at like St. Anne's Monday mornings if we lost each other for the week. Let's try to go to St. Anne's on a Monday morning and see if we can connect there. And just that idea that we're putting some measures or fail safes in place so we can have continuity. Otherwise, it becomes really frustrating as an outreach worker trying to find people all day, every day that you've lost contact with. It's also not overly effective. So let's have some pre-established meetup places.
Thank you so much, Iain. This has been a great conversation.
I want to thank the Alliance for creating this opportunity for me to share the thoughts. So thank you. And no offense to the Alliance, but even more thankful for the people who are putting the time in every single day in really tough conditions. You are invaluable. You're the spine and the backbone of the work. And never underestimate your ability to really make a difference in someone's life at a time when they need it. This work is often thankless. So on behalf of everybody who has not said thank you to you recently, thank you.